everyone. My name is Fiona. I'm the Community Health Program Coordinator at the YWCA for the South Florida location for their Health and Wellness Program. We welcome you today to our Wellness Wednesdays, where we demystifying health conditions that affect minority populations. I am pleased to have with me Courtney Wilson, a professor at Florida International University, with us today. He began his career working in the mental health field in New York City, supporting patients with comorbid mental health disabilities. After completing his master's in social work at Touro College in New York City, he focused on education and academic outcomes in minoritized youth. Dr. Wilson has also worked with marginalized high school groups and provided guidance to them for overcoming societal barriers in education, allowing for inclusion in higher education institutions not previously thought attainable. Over the years, he's developed a special interest in working with at-risk populations, communities, and educational institutions. And now he's continuing to focus continuing to focusing his work with city council members in local communities as part of a joint effort to increase interconnectedness, civic engagement, and opportunities available to marginalized groups. So his current research focuses on incorporating geographic information systems and understanding social and economic barriers to academic success for marginalized groups. In this next Wellness Wednesday series, we'll continue to discuss social determinants of health, which, just as a reminder, they're non-medical factors that can impact a person's health and well-being. So for today's topic, we're going to be discussing with Dr. Wilson, the neighborhood and built environment.
Just want to say, first off, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
So, Professor Wilson, I'm just going to jump right into the questions. And my first question to you is, can you provide an overview of what the term neighborhood and built environment encompasses in the context of the social determinants of health?
In regards to the social determinants of health, I want to sort of give an broad overview where you have about 5 different pillars that are mainly focused on, which is economic stability, educational access, and quality of that education, as well as healthcare access and the quality of that healthcare, along with social and community contacts, which we would be talking a little bit more about in neighborhood and the neighborhood and the built environment. So when we're looking at social determinants of health, we want to really start to consider the conditions people live, work, and play in, right? Neighborhood and built environment, which is neighborhood and built environment. How they impact it with health outcomes, whether you're looking at access to those health needs, such as good schools, food, farmers markets, maybe if the neighborhood does or does not have those, supermarkets, so on and so forth. Educational level also impacts overall health and expectations for life. So you're looking at educational level, the overall expectancy for health, and those health outcomes as well. So there's a variety of different areas in which we look at when we're talking about the social determinants of health. It's not just one specific thing. In addition, you're also looking at community walkability, which I feel oftentimes is not talked about, right? Do you live in a neighborhood that has the ability to walk to your local grocery store? Do you need to drive to your grocery store? Can you walk to a gym, or do you need to drive to a whole other community to get to a gym? So on and so forth. So those are all encompassing when you're talking about or really taking a deep dive into the social determinants of health and the neighborhood and built environment, right?
And thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask, since you touched a little bit about being able to walk to schools or walk to grocery stores, I wanted to ask, how does access to amenities like grocery stores, schools, and healthcare facilities influence health outcomes in a community?
Well, consider a child. We'll take a 10-year-old child that maybe, at the moment they're trying to stay healthy, right? Family, mom and dad want to keep them healthy, but in the direct area in which they live, you may have pizza shops. You also may have a McDonald's, a Dunkin' Donuts, a Burger King, a Wendy's or something. But what you're lacking in those neighborhoods is whether or not you have fresh fruits and vegetables, whether you have a farmer's market, right? Your healthy foods are going to come from those areas, not the fast food areas. And so that child that's 10 years old is more likely to get their food from those locations, such as that pizza shop that's offering $1.50 for a slice of pizza, rather than trying to obtain an apple or an orange or some form of fruit from some other location. So you have to consider all of those pieces in the context of health, because what we consume directly impacts whether or not we may have more visits to the hospital. Diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, all of those are impacted by the food in which we consume, as well as whether or not we have the ability to walk in our neighborhoods. And I want to also include, when we're talking about walkability, we're not just talking about whether or not someone could walk to a grocery store, right? We want to also talk about whether or not someone can actually walk in their community. And what do we mean by that? What does someone feel safe walking in their community? And so those are also important factors to consider.
Thank you. So talking about walkability, and I'm thinking about like transportation or those things that are barriers to somewhat of a transportation. What ways do infrastructure elements like transportation and road quality play a role in how it affects someone's health?
So I find that trying to give an example kind of makes the most sense, right? So we'll consider a single mom trying to get to work, and on her way to work, she hits a pothole. That pothole damages her car, possibly get a flat tire. That the infrastructure within her area is now causing or impacting her ability to get to work, right? Because of where she lives, that infrastructure, whether or not they're upkeeping that infrastructure, which quite oftentimes when you're living in impoverished areas, you'll often find that the roads may not be as well maintained as they may be maintained in other specific areas. And so now that mom who's trying to get to work based on the current infrastructure that's awarded or allowed for her in that environment may be now needed to miss work or maybe late to work, which also can impact whether or not she's receiving the same income for that week, or whether or not she has the ability to pay for groceries, or if she may even continue to have a job, right? Because depending on how often that issue may occur, she can be impacted by that, by losing her job or some form of adverse outcomes at the end of the day. And so hopefully that kind of puts it into perspective as far as the importance of infrastructure in in any neighborhood, really, not just majority of neighborhoods, but any neighborhood, the importance of infrastructure and being able to maintain those roads, maintain the ability for someone to actually get from point A to point B without the actual infrastructure being a factor with impacting their ability to do so. Right? Access to roads, so on and so forth. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I wanted to move forward with our next question. So Dr. Wilson, can you discuss the role of cultural and social cohesion in neighborhood environments and its effect on health?
Yes. So I guess my best tool is an example. So consider a community that does not have social cohesion, meaning they're not working together as a community. Establishing goals, accomplishing those goals becomes a lot more difficult. So being a community that does have social cohesion, if you looking at, maybe we'll take a look back at the infrastructure question, where you're looking at potholes or issues within the road system. A community that's working together can work together to address those issues and get those issues addressed, right? You may not be, the community itself may not be the ones that are fixing the potholes, but they can work together to talk to their commissioner or their representative to actually get that job done. And so the importance of community cohesion, civic engagement, civic capacity, all of those pieces are extremely important, because when you lack those within communities, you lack the ability to actually have any form of upward mobility. Upward mobility means being able to move from the position or the situation in which you're in to something that is better, right? And so you need to be able to have those in the community. And you usually get that by establishing some form of leadership within that community, and specifically establishing social cohesion to ensure that everyone's essentially on the same page. We want a better community, and because we want a better community, we are working together in order to do so.
Thank you. That was really good. And I wanted to ask, you touched on the community talking to their local government. So can you talk a little bit about how can neighborhood development and policy making better address the health needs of an underserved community?
Yeah. The area I would touch on is civic engagement, right? And so a couple of years ago, I worked in a community in Central Florida, a very impoverished community. I won't specifically name the community, but we worked on helping them to get more connected to areas of government, right? And so the first area of government that we really work them to help get connected with is their commissioner. A lot of us are unaware that we have a commissioner for the community in which we live. Many people actually don't even know the name of their commissioner. And so being able to start off where you can actually have something like a, what's the word I'm looking for? We did a community forum, right? Where you have the commissioner possibly come out. It's easier to get in touch with a commissioner and come to the community. It's not so easy to get to a mayor or, a governor, but if the local commissioner, it's a little bit easier to get them to participate in those things because those are their constituents. And if it means getting more constituents to vote for you, they're a lot more inclined to do the task at hand, right? So something along what we did in that particular situation is we did a study and we did a focus group and invited the commissioner to participate in the results, the discussion of the results of what that focus group, what the findings of that focus group was, excuse me. And so we used that space to help inform the commissioner about the issues that the community was essentially pointing to. A lot of the times you go into these communities, commissioners assume that this is an issue ailing the community, but they fail to actually ask or inquire, what is it that the community needs? And oftentimes the community's voice essentially goes unheard. And so you have these events, maybe at a community center where you're inviting community members, and some of those community members may actually be inclined to participate in the political arena, right? But they may not be aware of how to do so. And you can provide that space for them to do so and encourage more participation, political engagement or civic engagement to encourage more efficient and effective change within your community. So for me, the best way to do that is really doing some form of a community engagement forum, some form of a meeting with community members who are willing to attend. Of course, you're going to miss some of those community members, but it's an understanding that if you get some, that word of mouth does help to pass the importance around the community. But also the important piece is talking to community leaders. Oftentimes in a lot of communities, you'll find that those within the church are the community leaders. They know the most about what's going on in the community. You might find that someone in a local store or wherever it is may be someone who you can reach out as a community leader. And so doing the footwork in the community is also really important, not just for those of us stepping into these communities, but those who live in the communities. Because you want to better your community, do the footwork so that you can actually get the results that you intend to get. But it does take work, right? So, yeah.
So in light of just that civic engagement, do you know of any specific cities or countries that are leading the way in creating healthy neighborhood environments? And I wanted to ask, what can we learn from them?
It's a good question. Cities, right now I know, for instance, Orlando specifically has been taking steps towards that. And they've been quite focused on specifically addressing those pillars, right? Engagement, economic stability, education, health access. Even Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is Florida Blue, has been actively engaged in increase or impacting the social determinants of health for the communities in which they serve. And so what can we take out of that? I would say that talking about it is one thing, but we need to actively engage in the action to pursue these things. I love being able to pass on knowledge about social determinants of health. I love having these conversations with my students as well as with peers and friends. But the most important piece for me is being on the ground with the individuals, actively engaging in that work. And being able to understand where they're really coming from and what they truly do need in order to make their lives feel a little bit better. At no point do I think we're going to make anyone's life perfect, but what we can do is incrementally increase the quality of life for those individuals. By increasing that quality of life, you're also increasing their life expectancy and their health outcomes in the interim.
Thank you. You touched a lot on the different subsections of the neighborhood and built environment, and the examples that you gave of each were really, really helpful. So we appreciate that. I wanted to ask, what are the major challenges that you find in addressing health disparities related to neighborhood and built environment?
I think this is a challenge that everyone sort of faces. When you are not from that community, finding a way in the community is extremely difficult. And as a researcher who does this, it's really difficult when you've had previous researchers come in and they've worked with these communities, but they've done nothing for the community in terms of results, right? A lot of times you have, for lack of a better term, empty promises. And the communities, they're not slow. They see it. They see that they're often being used for, for the fact of just, how do I say, they're being used in a way that's not helpful for them, right? And so they're very reluctant to let you into their community and let you into their space. And so building those bonds with those leaders of those communities and finding a way to get them to let you in is probably the hardest piece, because it takes work. It doesn't happen overnight. You're talking about not weeks, but months, sometimes a year or more worth of work in order to actually get your foot in and have those who are in that community trust you enough to come out to a meeting, to participate in a focus group, to actively become engaged in what it means to make their community better, right? So it's really building that rapport. Any relationship that you want to build, whether it's a professional or a friendly relationship or a family relationship, it takes effort. It's a little bit easier when it's a friend. It's a lot harder when it's a complete stranger. It's even harder when it's a group of complete strangers, because now you're trying to figure out a way to appeal to all of their interests in a way that makes sense to them, and that motivates them to do something a little bit better in terms of being informed and being motivated to actually make changes for their community, but that's honestly been the hardest part of it, the building rapport.
So in light of that, I know you mentioned how some researchers, they're just doing the research on the communities, but not necessarily doing anything impactful for them. And I know that you, as a researcher, that you've done a lot, especially in Central Florida. I wanted to know what's been most surprising or the most impactful finding in your research or work in this field.
I'm going to see if I can take this question in parts, because there are a couple questions in there, right? The most surprising and the most impactful, correct? The most surprising for me is to find that in a lot of these communities, there's a lot of areas in which we don't consider. For instance, air quality. We don't consider how impactful air quality is in communities, right? Whether or not this community is near a waste dump, whether or not the soil in the community is actually toxic for growth, right? If you can plant things in the soil, or do you need to do raised beds in order to incorporate more fresh fruits and vegetables for the community, right? That's probably the most shocking thing that I've encountered when working in these communities, because I never really considered something so simple as air quality. What was the second part of your question was what's the most impactful? I'd say there's so much to really choose from, right? The impact really comes from that feeling, specifically to me, that I get when I see that those that I'm working with are actively making that switch. And that's, for me, that's where the most impact for me comes from, when I see that what I have brought to the table makes sense. And not just makes sense, but they're actually inclined to incorporate it now into a daily routine. Some of the work that I did worked on incorporating raised beds in the community in Central Florida. And so not a lot of people understood what it meant to do gardening, for instance, grow a tomato, grow pepper, potatoes. And so being able to teach that and work with the community to help there's a community location that I worked with to help the community in a way learn how to do the appropriate gardening, what needs to be done with the soil regularly, stuff like that. And so seeing the people, and most importantly, the kids in the community take joy in those activities is the most impactful for me, because I know now that the next generation that's growing up in that community does have a better understanding of what it means to eat healthy, or to get better education, to make sure that they're incorporating better things into their diet and not just eating, McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, or just pizza, right? So that's most impactful for me, for sure, to see those results.
And I believe that the community will, further on down the line, will really appreciate the work that you've started there, and hopefully that they continue doing that. I wanted to ask, looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future regarding the neighborhood and built environment as a social determinant of health?
My hope is that we, as a larger community, start to truly take it as an important factor when we're looking at how we can improve the quality of health for those in impoverished communities. Because if you look at the suburbs typically they don't have to deal with a lot of these issues, right? But when you look at neighborhoods that are disadvantaged or impoverished, they're typically those neighborhoods that are left behind or forgotten. And I want to hopefully at some point have us as a larger community realize the importance of incorporating the health and wealth of those communities in our overall growth. Because at the end of the day, we are one community. When part of us fails, it starts a ripple effect elsewhere. And as much as we like to believe and try to, pretend that we live in our own independent silos, we do not. Everything is impacting everything else. And so having us really look at it in a systemic way where we can say, all right, what's going on here, we need to address so that we can all do better. That's really what I'm hoping down the line. Having a deeper understanding of the social determinants of health will do for all of us, because it's truly important. And even though you may think that you're not impacted by it, the reality is there are factors there that if you look a little bit deeper, you'll realize, oh my goodness, this may not be a primary impact, but there may be secondary and tertiary impacts that I'm feeling simply because of what's going on. And an example of that would be, you live in a community, there's a hospital, and now maybe on the south side of your community, health is not that great. What happens to the hospital, right? You get overflown with patients who need services. And now when you need your service, you have to wait a lot longer. So it's those things that I would love for people to start understanding in reference to caring a little bit more about your neighbor, and doing a little bit more to ensure that those neighbors are at least just as well taken care of as you are.
Thank you. I really appreciate your insight on that. And we here just doing this series of Wellness Wednesdays, we have that hope too, that our community will really understand how interconnected we are and how all of that does affect our health. So again, thank you, Dr. Wilson, for sharing your valuable insight and expertise with us today. The neighborhood and built environment is a critical component of health and the social determinants, especially in minority communities. So we hope that understanding these factors can empower us to advocate for change and to work towards a more equitable community. To our audience, we thank you guys for joining us today on this Wellness Wednesday edition. We hope that this discussion has provided you with some useful information and inspire you to continue learning about the social determinants of health. Remember, education is power, and by addressing these non-medical factors, we can contribute to a healthier and more inclusive society. So stay tuned to the next Wellness Wednesday session, and we will continue to explore more important topics that impact our community. Thank you, stay well, and take care. Bye.